All right, welcome to the Mental Health Happy Hour. I am Jason, the bipolar DM, and we're here with J.R. Reed. Together, we have a discussion about mental health issues and try and put a positive spin on things. Look at it from a different angle than what we normally do. And today's show, we have a great guest, Mike Forrester. He is a life coach and has lots of experience and a fantastic story to tell. And
Yeah,
so, yeah,
and you know,
all right.
I personally think that it's not just the mental health issues that are important; it's how they came about.
Mm-hmm,
It's what happened previously in your life to get you to that point. And I think it's important for people to understand what kind of things will affect their mental health or the mental health of those around them.
mm-hmm.
So, with no further ado, let's bring on Mike. How you doing, Mike?
I'm doing great. JR, Jason, thank you for having me.
Oh,
Yeah.
no problem. So, Mike is from the heartland of Kansas, and Jason and I are both coming from the Ozarks in Missouri. So, it's really hot and humid where we live. So, Mike, why don't you tell us a little bit? Well, just first kind of give us what you want to talk about, and then let's go back in your history and kind of tell the story.
Okay, sounds good. So I would love to just first give somebody hope and grace as they're going along through their journey right now. I
Absolutely.
think that's so often what we miss, and to also understand you're not alone. In isolation, we'll feel separated, we'll think it's just us. There's nothing further from the truth. And so as I've gone through my journey, I've helped other folks, as they're making that transition. And now as a men's transformation coach, I get to see it, you know, up front, close and personal. That, while we may have different stories, we're all traversing this journey together. And
Mhm.
so we can learn from each other, we can encourage each other, and, give a hand to help one another up and as we're moving forward.
Well, Mike, I'll say this: Jason is bipolar. I'm autistic, but we both understand the same principles
Yeah.
of what each other is going through.
Mm-hmm.
Totally. And I mean that's like I'm dyslexic, right? And I was I didn't discover that until I was 40 years old and my wife is homeschooling our four children and she's ended up crying because two of them aren't grasping the skills the way that, one they want to. I mean they're doing their best, but it's oftentimes until we understand what we're facing that we can really address it from there. So the funny thing was in going and testing, one of my daughters and my son, and just saying like, what's going on? Like my wife is crying, my children are frustrated, like nobody likes school. It wasn't until we went and we were getting the results that I asked the lady that was helping walk us through the results. I'm like, why is this word this? And she's like, it's you. You're the one that has dyslexia that they've inherited it from. I'm like, excuse me? But it made so much sense.
Mm-hmm.
But now I'm at that point. Well, back then, I was 40 years old. I had four children. I'm an adult who's learned how to process things in a certain way. Now, new light, the truth is shed upon everything that I have to then go back and go, oh, well, with this, how do I now handle things?
Mm-hmm.
So the funny thing is, my wife, because of her passion and what she went through, the struggle and the frustration, and seeing our children go through it, she went and learned you know, how to help our children. She's now doing remediation with dyslexia, dysgraphia, and dyscalculia. So
That's awesome.
yeah, so we were her test case, you know.
Yeah. Well,
So
and similar to you as being diagnosed at 45 and not understanding things, I was diagnosed just a few weeks before my 46th birthday, and the things that I had to do
right,
because my brain just said you've got to do this. suddenly made a whole lot of sense.
Yeah. And unfortunately, I think it's as we've grown up, the ways we've interacted and the messages we've been told, because we don't fit into like that normal box. Right. So the messages that we hear, that we sense, I mean, those are debilitating. And those are things then when that light is shed that we have to work from and learn new truths, right? Identify ourselves differently. You know, it's freeing, and yet it's concerning because you're like, well, this is different than what I expected before. And so it's learning to focus on that freedom and what you get to do, because you're going to do things differently, right?
Mm-hmm. Well, you've had some things in your past that I think really shaped some of your mental health issues. You know, for lack of a better term, I don't call them conditions. I think they're just issues that if we find certain ways, we can partially overcome it.
Correct. Yeah. And again, it's just like with the dyslexia, like the labels that we receive. So it wasn't until I'm going through life as a parent, as a husband, and I'm not in the place I want to be, nor am I feeling in the relationships like I'm engaged at the level I want. And I had to go back and through mentoring, coaching, talking with friends, you know, just trying different things and finally relenting and saying, I need help. Because understand, the stuff that I believed and I was told, you're not good enough, you're not worthy, you're not going to amount to anything, all set a precedence for me, a mindset where if I asked for help, that was a sign of weakness, and that sign of weakness, you know, was failing, and so that then labeled me as a failure. None of us want to be a failure. So I avoided asking for help for the longest period of time, which was detrimental to me and my growth. I wish I had asked sooner. I didn't. But there's no time like the present, right? To ask for help and have others alongside of you.
Well, you know, it's been almost 10 years since I was diagnosed, and I still have problems asking for help. And I think, Jason, don't you kind of go through the same thing?
I did in the beginning. That was the biggest thing, is, you know, getting past that. I started my journey a lot younger in life. I was 22 when I was diagnosed, so I've had 20 years of, you know, 20 plus years of experience behind me now to know when to ask for help, and also more importantly too, who to ask help from, because having the right source is paramount a lot of times too. Because if you ask the wrong doctor or talk to the wrong person, it can go off the rails real fast.
Yeah, and one thing I think that's important to point out is, you know, doctors in the medical field are not the only people you can talk to. You can talk to people that have the condition, the self-advocates, or the families of a person with that condition, because they can explain it to you like it really is.
Yeah, and that's so true. I mean, the people that are walking through it will understand it at a different way than you will from like a textbook.
Yeah.
And so a textbook can give you understanding, but it won't give you like that sympathy, that I've walked in your shoes, you know, understanding.
Yeah. So I'm sorry I interrupted that. So, I mean, please continue your story when you're done.
No, you're totally cool, JR. The thing that really helped me was exactly like you're talking about, asking somebody else for help that has gone through that. There were other men that helped me to understand that, hey, what you went through and you grew up, you know, under was not normal. I found out, you know, my mom was paranoid schizophrenic. She didn't want help. And so again, it wasn't until I'm a dad, I was probably mid 30s when I found out that when my mother had acted out against a neighbor, the police were called, a clinician came out and, you know, did a field assessment and took her in, got her evaluated, at that point, and help was offered, but she didn't want it. Like they literally went and hid and didn't communicate
Yeah.
with the legal system or law enforcement.
Well, I think that our parents grew up in a don't talk about it kind of environment. You didn't talk about your problems or your medical conditions or your God forbid mental conditions, because they were looked at as completely taboo and word I don't like to use, but they were labeled as crazy.
Yeah. And unfortunately, I mean, this is an understanding I had to get to, and is one I would ask, for you guys and all those that are listening. Please understand, my parents did the best with what they knew. They went through similar experiences, and as much as what I went through as my childhood trauma, they were repeating what they had experienced. And so, it's that whole generational pattern, a legacy that we pass on.
Right. I mean, for autism, the 50s, 60s, and early 70s, it was called the refrigerator mom syndrome. And they thought that's why kids were autistic, because their mothers neglected them.
Right.
Now we know that's not the case. But when you got someone like my mother, who was in her 20s and, maybe early 30s during that whole period, that's what they come to believe. And it's still in the back of their minds.
Yeah. And I can't imagine the weight that puts on a mom.
Right.
It's like, okay, what did I do wrong? Just like we talked about, my wife is in tears with our children. She was always questioning herself. What have I done wrong? What am I not doing right? And unless we're asking for help, we're going to continue to perpetuate that. And at that time, I don't think there was help that would have shed the light differently. But it's one of, when you've got a community around you, you can go about handling things in a different way. And, when we stay isolated, when we're not asking for help, it just kind of puts us into a cycle where we go down lower. We're depressed, we've got anxiety, we're thinking the worst of ourselves and everything around us. And that was one thing. Go ahead, JR.
Oh, I would say, Jason, you ended up with PTSD from some of your medical, Army medical problems and situations that you were exposed to. And I think it was probably hard for you to start talking about it too, wasn't it?
Yeah, especially since I wasn't in combat and had that stigma that if you weren't in combat, you can't get PTSD, and how that mentality was. And so it was very hard for a long time even to talk to my doctors about it.
Yeah. Well, although you weren't in combat, you worked at Walter Reed Medical Center, which is the premier Army hospital in the country. So you saw the worst of the worst that came from the battlefield.
Yeah, and we had Bosnia going on at that time. So, and then also the embassy bombings of Kenya and Tanzania.
So even though you weren't there with boots on the ground, you were here with boots on the ground, seeing it all.
Yeah, here to clean up the mess, so to speak.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mike, go. Keep going, please. I'm loving this.
Well, I was going to say, that's a lot to take on, Jason, because it's like, how do you compartmentalize it? And I mean, it's not like you can talk to anybody.
And it's when those doors. Yeah, it's like when those walls break down. You do start out with it compartmentalized, but then when those walls come down, that's when and you're alone in the dark. That's when it's the worst.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. JR, as far as like when you were asking about like the childhood stuff that I worked through, right? It wasn't until I started healing myself at a core level that I could then take a look at what was still playing out in my life.
Mm-hmm.
And so one thing that happened with my parents, they both were we didn't have a lot of money, right? So in order to control things, they put a chain and a lock around the fridge of the door. So that played out when I was an adult, that I needed to have a fully stocked fridge, freezer, pantry. Otherwise, I had anxiety. I didn't feel like I was taking care of my family. I didn't have that sense of security because the food wasn't accessible and there wasn't plenty of it.
Right.
But unless you know that, like you've gotten past like a base level to heal yourself and to be in a position of saying, yeah, I understand what's going on. You can then look at the beliefs that you have, the things that are playing out. The utility truck comes by and pulls up in front of your house. Why are you freaking out and all of a sudden feeling a higher level of anxiety? Well, it goes back to when you didn't have any money, and so the power was getting shut off. And so your first reaction is, I need to run downstairs and look on the internet and see if my bill is paid.
Yeah.
There's all these triggers that will come up for us, but we've got to be on a journey to be in a healthy place to then kind of take those layers away.
Right. And stuff like the lock around the refrigerator.
Yeah.
I mean, that is part of childhood trauma.
Yeah. And the interesting thing is, it's like, she was doing what she thought was best to make sure that there was food in the house.
Mm-hmm.
Although now I can look back and say, well, I always wondered why I had broken bones as I was growing up. And it wasn't from like physical abuse, but I honestly think it was a malnourishment.
It was a lack of calcium.
Yeah, exactly. Because when you're eating, just bread with margarine, or you're eating for 6 months, you're eating macaroni for dinner, there's not a whole lot of variety or nourishment that's coming with it. But at least it was food, so that's where I'm like, hey, they did the best with what they had. What are the things that play out now, and how do I address them?
Well, and then Jason and Mike, us as parents now, we have to turn that around and make sure that our kids don't go through it.
Yeah, but also walking that fine line that we don't overindulge our kids though either too. That's the other thing is, you have a generation of kids that are morbidly obese. Even my own kids are over a healthy weight right now. And so, it's you kind of have to walk a fine line of, all right, keeping stuff in the house, but at the same time, making sure it's healthy and making sure it's not a lot of junk food and stuff like that.
Yeah, and by the way, for anybody watching right now, please, if you have questions for Mike, throw them in the chat box or underneath where you see the video on Facebook, and please ask.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we're here to help. That's our passion. That's why we're visible, is because we all want to see other people to be able to be in a healthy place and not have to kind of go that road alone. So,
yeah, and Mike, something you said before we went on the air is if we only help one or two people, it was worth it. I mean, every time I go speak, every time I write an article, anything, if I can just help one person, then it was worth the time and the effort and the research and whatever else I put into it.
Mm-hmm. Most definitely. And you had talked about, as far as being a parent. So how that played out was I became verbally abusive with my wife and children. Can you imagine if you had spoken and I had been in the audience, you'd been able to help me, the pain that we can save our children that then would potentially pass on to our grandchildren and that generational pattern again.
So
it's
important.
huge. Yeah. And I've been really blessed because my children and my wife were patient with me. And, we had to build up trust. Don't get me wrong. It wasn't like, boom, everything's amazing. And my children are flocking going, oh, Father,
Right.
It couldn't be further from the truth. I had manipulated for so long in who I was to get their trust and their responses and have them act in a certain way that I had abused them in that way. So once I did start to change, then I had to build that trust. And so from us as parents, when we're healing from the trauma and the abuse that's gone on, we need to be patient and give grace to our children, our family, to allow them to learn that we have genuinely changed because we've trained them to expect us to behave in a certain way. So
Yeah. Go ahead.
No, go ahead. You're good, JR.
And it's not just family. It's somebody you're dating, romantic relationships, business relationships, social relationships.
Mm-hmm.
If somebody's been burned or you've burned somebody and lost their trust, it's going to take time and effort to get that trust back.
Correct. It's hard to put the shoe on the other foot because we know where we are, but somebody else, may not understand fully where we are. And so that's where I think the grace and the patience comes in. And like you said, it could be a coworker, it could be a friend. We've got to be consistent in how we're changing. That doesn't mean you're going to be perfect, but you're working through to be more consistent and more in line with where you want to be, not with who you've been.
Right. And they say, if you met one person with autism, you've met one person with autism, meaning that we're all different and have a different story. It's the same for you. All the stuff that you've gone through, other people who have gone through the same thing can understand it, but they don't totally know the story.
Mm-hmm.
Correct. And I think with the holidays coming up, that's probably one of the hardest times, is because we get entrenched in a role that we play with our families.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So if I'm angry with like my family, we're coming back together for Thanksgiving dinner, there's an expectation from them, unless they've learned, hey, my relative Mike isn't this person anymore. They're still going to expect me to play in that same role, that same capacity. It's almost like you have a production, like in the drama club at high school or college. Everybody takes a role and plays it. You have to give people a chance to learn for you playing a different part.
And to be clear, I was never the drunk uncle character. Although the drunk uncle character is fun.
Oh, yes. It in the early part of the day, he's fun.
I went to a birthday party when I still lived in California, and the person I was with, told me that when grandma shows up, don't let her get near the vodka. So what did I do? Grandma showed up, sat down. I grabbed the bottle of vodka, set it down because I wanted to see.
You wanted to see how things would go, huh?
Yeah, I wanted to see the story behind it.
How did it go?
It went pretty well for me. And by the way, I'm not saying feed alcohol to people, who have a problem with it.
Yeah.
But, looking back, I probably shouldn't have done that, but it was enlightening.
Yeah. And the thing is, as you heal, you get to see the unhealthiness of where people still are, right? You'll get a chance to see where the family that wants to stay where they are, how they continue to behave and go about. And it's again, patience comes around, give them space because you were there. You've just taken the effort and made the changes. So, encourage them to grow as well in a encouraging way.
Yeah, for sure.
Not a less than or holier than thou or whatever,
right?
Demeaning
right.
And
Jason, I think that although the three of us have different stories and different conditions, that part of what you just said, Mike, is the same for it, whatever.
Yeah, there's always going to be something universal about our stories, and usually it's the struggles, the failures, the comebacks, however small they may be. And so we all have those kind of stories, no matter what our conditions are.
Well, and then trying to help people understand and help people who you see in a similar condition. I think that's all of us too.
Or really in any kind of crisis condition. So, that ability to empathize across not only your story but other people's stories allows you to help others that are coming from somewhere completely different.
Jason mentioning suicide, we got the National Suicide Prevention Hotline on the bottom of your screen. If you are ever in deep enough in whatever that you feel like you need to take your life, you need to call that number or a number similar to it.
Definitely.
And if you're a soldier, veteran, once you get to that number, press 1 and you'll get directed towards a specialist who's been trained to help with soldiers with PTSD and other similar conditions.
Right. Yep. Mike, please continue.
So what, like we talked about, figuring out the things that are still holding us hostage, or like the limiting thoughts, right? So a while back, my wife and I were driving from Kansas to California. Now you can question my sanity in making that drive, but
I was born in Nebraska, and my parents grew up 13 miles from where Colorado, Wyoming, and Nebraska come together. So I've made that trip. I made that trip many times.
Yeah. Okay. So you'll appreciate this then. Like when we saw the desert, I just, not a full-blown hatred, but I disliked the desert. It wasn't the place I wanted to be. Now, I've not had like a climbing accident or anything like that where I've had to cut my arm off, or I've gone days without water. Yeah. But what I did realize in talking with my wife was that my father used to always say, you could put him in the desert and you would never find him. He would survive. He'd be fine, no problems. So we're already talking abandonment.
So it's just the words that he used.
Correct. There's a second part to it, but his words, like he never left us. He was absent in involvement, like he was an absent father, but he never left or separated from my mother. So, but it was definitely the message he left us.
Yeah.
My mother with her, I'm sorry, JR, go ahead.
I just said, wow.
Okay. My mother with her paranoid schizophrenia, right? She's worried about everybody knowing her business. Well, we lived in duplexes, and in a duplex, you've got somebody on the side that's attached to you and somebody that's, got a little air gap that's in another building next to you.
And the walls aren't always the thickest.
What's that?
And the walls aren't always really thick.
Dude, they're tissue paper. I mean, they've got a little bit there. I don't know that I would call it sheetrock, but that was where my mom, when she wanted to get after us, she didn't want to yell so that everybody would know what's going on. She would have my dad load us up in the car. So it was my brother that was 5 years younger than I. And I mean, this was from the time we were probably 7, 8, until I left home when I graduated high school. So along those time frames, whenever she reached a critical point, she would have him put us all in the car, drive us out to the desert. She would berate us, tear us up one side, down the other, for what we did wrong or didn't do right. And so both of those things combined then left me with a place mentally saying the desert is not a fun place. This is, but at that point I can then go, hey, I understand the reason for this. The desert's not bad. It's just these memories that occurred here, are not healthy. Right. They're not normal. And so I can work on separating stuff.
And that's important to separate things.
Totally. Because I mean, it's nice to think that, how I perform in business is just related to business, and how I act and appear within my personal life are totally separate. But the truth is, you're the same. You go to both places. The limitations that you have will show up in both areas. And so when I was looking to get help to be better at work, it often came back to how I was and appeared in my personal life, and I had to take a step back and deal with me. So every time I had a question in business, it was like, okay, what do I have to deal with? But that helped me to grow and to heal and do better at work and to be more healthy and whole for my family, instead of being the bomb that's going to go off and then everybody's walking on eggshells for 3 days going, Dad's just, like the Hulk, except he's not green or stacked like the Hulk, so.
Who is?
Yeah.
Except Lou Ferrigno.
Exactly.
Yeah, but I think it, and I'm asking this. I think it probably took quite a bit of time after you made that transition and those realizations, and you changed the behavior for them to fully get behind you again.
It most definitely. And there's still stuff that, let's be honest, JR. I'm still learning about things that happened in my childhood and learning how those things then impact me today. So it's a self-discovery process that doesn't just come overnight and it's like, boom, hey, I'm done and gone. It's like going to the gym. You go to the gym on a consistent, regular basis. You dig into stuff, right? Hey, I want bigger pecs. Okay, I do this. I want bigger biceps. I do this. Same thing. I want a more vibrant marriage. I want to be more satisfied and have a healthy feeling of worth. Mm-hmm. You're gonna have to do work and hard work. It's not easy. It's not like, hey, I'm gonna carry a bag of groceries and have biceps like we were talking about with Lou Ferrigno or any of the actors that we see in like the MCU, right?
Yeah.
They put in a concerted effort.
Those are bodysuits.
Can we get emotional bodysuits?
Yeah, no, I don't think you can get an emotional bodysuit. You can mask. You can mask for a little bit, but eventually that mask has to come off at some point, even just for a breather.
And the unfortunate thing with when you wear a mask is that your identity gets lost.
Yeah.
I know for me, that was how I found security, right? In relationships, if I entered into a room, I would look for who's the strongest person and try to appease and satisfy them, because that bought me acceptance into the group.
Right. And get on good with the alpha male.
Yeah. It's like, okay, I at least know I'm not going to get pelted and put in a corner and beaten up, right?
Yeah.
So you do that for so long, you forget what your interest is, what your identity is, who you are. And part of my journey in healing was figuring out what I do and don't like. What is it like that I want to do? And there's a lot of different areas that you can work on, and it's some heavy lifting. I think all three of us can attest to that, as we've put in effort to get to where we're at, and we know we still have more to go, but we're in a different place to appreciate it.
Yeah. And we got a comment from Elijah Winfrey, who is an autism advocate. He is I believe it's a nephew on the autism spectrum, and the work he does is just amazing.
Elijah, thank you.
Thank you, Elijah. It's been too long. We'll talk soon. But sorry to interrupt. I just wanted to
go ahead
get that
Jason,
out.
Did you want to jump in there?
I was just kind of wondering about, wanted to talk a little bit about what you're doing now with your men's transformation, your coaching. I was very interested in that. Just read a little bit about your background, and you're doing some very interesting stuff.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. So a lot of it, if we've all talked here about like our history, our background being what keeps us chained. And so obviously forgiveness is going to be a part of that. Forgiving ourselves, is a key component. And that was one of the hardest things, and something I still work through. But it's forgiving other people around us. Like I talked about, my mom and dad, I had to, understand where they came from. I made the choice to figure out where they came from.
Right.
And what they went through. That then freed me to not be angry, upset, bitter at them.
Like it's the same thing with my mom, who for a lot of years was ignorant to autism and didn't know it. I just had to remember the time she grew up, the place she grew up, the attitudes towards stuff like that. And it made it easier to understand.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think, honestly, as a parent myself, I didn't intend to hurt my kids. That was never what I wanted to do. But acting from what I had learned and where I was at, that was exactly what I carried out. I repeated the pattern.
Yeah.
And so it was one of, I then looked at it, how would my kids look at me having done the best I could do with what I had and what I knew? Mm-hmm. I would want grace. I would want forgiveness. Fortunately, that's what they have granted me. And so that was what I chose to extend to my parents as well. And it was the most freeing thing, which seems crazy, right? It's I'm choosing to forgive somebody else. How is that going to impact me? But that load, that weight that we keep on us is oppressive. We don't realize it until we let it go and then experience it in a different way. So
yeah. Jason, I mean, have you experienced anything like that with your family?
A little bit. It's been some work with the kids. You know, a lot of years because there were some dark years that I'm never going to get back, and but you know, the kids have been resilient. I only think only 2 of them are in therapy, so I think I'm batting 500 right now. So, but
Actually, you're batting 666.
oh,
Because I only know of 3.
I got 4 of them.
Okay, well, so you're batting 500. Sorry.
Yeah.
I've got 4 children as well, and they're adults. I think when the kids are kids, it's so easy to think like we can control and kind of direct their steps. When they become an adult, they're making their own decisions. And so it was a matter of giving them space, explaining what was going on, and apologizing. I mean, that wasn't something that was normative in my family at all. And so for, like you're in that same place, I'm assuming, is that was not a pattern that was set out by your parents, right, Jason?
Right, exactly. My dad was very hardcore military, so
yeah. And so, I mean, the amazing thing is, guys, we have the chance to be change makers, change the legacy that we're leaving, to be a chain breaker. The stuff that's held us back that we're now working through, we can leave a different like a different path, a different mindset.
And help other people who are on that path to get them, or who strayed off the path, to get them back on the path.
Yeah.
Yep. And I mean,
I was just gonna say, and it's also, it's more than it's being a guide, because you, as much as you want to, like with your kids, you can't control what somebody else is going to do or won't do. So got to keep that in mind, especially when you're trying to be a guide to somebody else. Is that you can show them the way, but you can't make them take that path.
Yeah, it's like they go to a friend's house and are allowed to do things that they're not allowed to do at home, and then when they do it at home, but Johnny's mom says it's okay.
Yeah. And I think that's for us as parents. I mean, that's normal. We're all unique in how we raise our kids. Is just letting them share, what they're seeing, what they're experiencing, what do they want, and talking with them to let them express themselves. And that was something I missed out big time, guys. I was very much like the authoritarian, like a dictator. Shut them down before they can express, so that they follow the rule. So that hampered them. Like, as I was talking about the healing process, that hampered them in expressing what they were feeling, because they were trained in, hey, Dad's just going to bash us once I say something that's against him. It takes time. I mean, it's taken years to get to the point where my children are like, Dad, you just did this. That's not okay. Because before it would have been like, how dare you speak against me? You know, I was insecure, and that was how I acted out. Doesn't make it okay.
We all act out when we're insecure.
Very true.
Yeah.
Very true. It doesn't make it okay for what I did to them. It's part of that experience, and it's part of the growth. And now I get to watch them as they're raising their children, how they're navigating it. And I'm excited that, they're like, hey, the little toddler is squealing because he's excited. Whereas before it would have been like, hey, that's noise, just shut it down. I don't care if it's happy or sad.
Yeah.
They're aware of stuff, and they're standing up for themselves and their child. So, I mean, we are agents of change. So please, again, like I said before, take hope. Just because this was what you received and this is how you've been doesn't mean how you have to be, nor what you need to leave your children in. So there is hope. It takes work, but man, it's amazing to get to the other side and see that progress.
Yeah, I think after all those dark days, to finally see the light and what the light brings with it is really eye-opening.
Very much so. Very much so. If you had asked me back when I actually took that risk and asked for help, I never in my wildest dreams would have imagined being here because of what I had experienced. So I just had sold myself as, we'll be divorced, my kids will hate me, and I'll be in some apartment miserable, watching TV and having no life. I'm relegated to this. This is what my lot in life is. And that's not the case. We get to choose, but we also have to take the action and put in the effort to continue to work.
Yeah. Jason, you have any thoughts on that?
Not in particular. Kind of nailed it right there.
Yeah, I don't think you could have said that.
Do it. Yeah, he kind of really got it. So yeah, it's kind of hard to add to that.
I appreciate it, Jason. Thank you.
Yeah.
So, in your world today, what kind of things do you go through with now your kids being adults, and how do you still show them, even though they're living away from you, that you're still that changed guy?
I just send them money. That makes everything better.
Oh,
I'm kidding, JR.
but probably not so much. Kidding.
No, fortunately, my wife, being the wise lady that she is, trained them on finances, that was a point of contention in our marriage. Again, because I talked about, growing up with a lack of money, that was something that was a point of contention in our marriage. And so my wife was like, we're not continuing this one. So she has taught them how to, be independent, how to handle their finances, and, to plan ahead. So they're not starting with all the cards stacked the way she and I did at that time.
Yeah.
As adults, do they come back to you for advice or for help at this point in time?
They do, but the thing is, I will let them ask, right? I'm not inserting myself and going, hey, the way you're parenting is bad. I don't agree with it. It's one of, hey, Dad, I'm having this problem. I'm experiencing this. What would you do?
Right, and that's what I meant by it. Not you telling them, but them coming to you.
Yeah, you will not create, facilitate, or pull anybody in by telling them what to do. I mean, if you think about it, like if somebody comes and tells you what to do differently, how welcomed are they for the advice that they give, even if it's the correct advice?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So, the thing that I also have to let go of, and this is what I can control, because I can't control them asking me, but I can control watching them. And if they don't take the advice, they have at least received it, and it's up to them allowing them the space to make their decision on what they're going to do. So it's almost like a dance, I would say, JR.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's with me, and the way my autistic brain works is very literal and factual. So I just want to absorb all the information, and that's all you can really want for your kids, that they listen to you, that they get all the information from other sources and everything. They put it together and they figure out what's best for them.
Yeah, very much. Because, I mean, we still do want the best for our kids, regardless of whether they're little kids or they're adults. It's like you still want to see them do well. So your heart's for them. But, it's just like when I left home, I wanted to be in charge of making my decisions. It was my life. I need to give them that same space to say, I have the information. This is the decision that I feel is best for me. And that can be the hard part as being a parent, is releasing them. And don't really have a choice, like in releasing, because they are an adult, but you control the fact of yourself, not inserting yourself in there is I guess the best way to put it.
Yeah. And we've seen relationships where the parents haven't released the kids, where they still held on to the adult children, and how unhealthy that is. So we've seen the other side of the coin as well too.
Yeah.
And that was something I almost made the mistake. Fortunately, and I think this is very important in our relationships, we need to have others who will speak the truth to us lovingly, but also truthfully. I don't need stuff couched. Like, I'm sorry, just me. I need it point blank. Hey, Mike, this is what you're looking at if you take this action. I need to know the truth. And just like we talked about, having the information to make that decision. There was a point where one of my children wasn't following on the course that I thought that they needed to, and almost disowned them, which was, again, going back to my mom and my grandmother. They would get together and disown each other every 3 to 5 years. It was just this cycle that they went through. That same pattern I then carried into my parenting. And while I was raising them, I always said it as a joke, but they took it as something serious where, if we fall out of line, Dad may disown us. And true to form, that was almost what I did with one of my children, until a friend sat up and said, is this really what you want to do? Do you want to risk, being distant, not being in their life, losing them? And it was like, no, this is not worth it. Did I agree with what they were doing? No, I still didn't agree. But just like we talked about relinquishing and releasing, that was what I chose to do, because I didn't see it as being the best choice in keeping that relationship.
Yeah, well, I think, as much as we don't want to be our parents, and I don't mean that in a negative way, but, we want to be our own independent people, we still end up with some of those traits that we grew up with, because it's just ingrained in us.
Well, and how many times, look at your children, how many times have you seen them do something that it's like, wow, that's exactly what I would do? They're like little models of us.
Yeah.
They're almost like robots. They get their code from us and they go out and they do the same thing that they've seen us doing. I see it in my grandchildren. It's like, that's very much like his mother. It's like, you can look at it humorously, but then there's also that other stuff that, we may not take it on the lighter side, but it's still the same truth of our kids are modeling us, and we can see it in their behavior and what they do.
Sorry about that phone. I keep forgetting to take it off the, I pulled the power plug before I do this.
You're good, JR.
I do it to my cell phone all the time. Turn that off. Forget the hard line.
Well, the thing, I will be honest, I do for myself is I have like a checklist, because otherwise it's like, I overlook it. And so there's a list I have for all the stuff, just because I know that's my spot of where I need help, so
And I think I'm going to create a checklist right after the show.
Well,
I got a checklist right here.
there you go. Jason's got it. You need
Yeah,
to be showing us your checklist there, Jason.
One of my little tricks is for like the intro and outro and stuff like that. I just got little check boxes that I got to do.
Yeah. The joke around my house is that, Dad, did you write it down? So it's one of those of, hey, that's something I struggle with, is remembering certain things. And we've gotten it to a point where my kids can say it to kindly remind me, but we can all have a laugh about it. I think that's part of creating a healthy environment where you don't take yourself so seriously. And when I was insecure and had low self-worth and low self-esteem, there was no joking about, my weaknesses. That led to bad,
no, because
fallout.
We didn't take it as joking. We took it as people are seeing my faults and pointing them out to me.
Exactly. And it's one that people want to have fun, because it's like, we all know our own weakness well, but do you give permission to others around you to acknowledge and even to speak about what they see? Because we don't hide stuff. I think that was the biggest fallacy, is I thought I was hiding things that I felt were wrong about me, that I was insecure about. But the truth was, people around me already knew it and they were well aware. I was the only one that was living in denial. So might as well have some laughs with it.
I laugh at myself more than anybody else.
Yes, I totally agree.
And I think you almost have to, in order to keep that healthy mindset.
You definitely do.
It keeps you from getting all negative on yourself and remembering
seriously.
Yeah. And removing all your stuff from your past.
Yeah, because there's so much. You're doing a lot of heavy lifting. I think we've talked quite a bit about that. It's going to be a lot of work. But if, like, when you go to the gym and you don't want to work out, how long are you going to stick with it? If you see it from a thing. What's that?
20 minutes.
Yeah.
You're sticking with it longer than most of us. It's like, walk in, lift the set, and I'm gone.
I was being generous.
But it's the same thing. If we see the work that we're doing as heavy and unwanted, then we're not going to stick with it. And we need to stick with it in order to give ourselves the time to get through everything that we've experienced and just haven't addressed. And I think the three of us can speak to the fact that it's like, it's worth it on the other side. It's a lot of heavy lifting, but man, being on this side of it, where it's like, okay, hey, I'm not carrying around all that weight that was, in my head and in my beliefs. You're a lot freer. You can have impact in your life, your family's life, and those around you that you couldn't before.
And one of the things that I've noticed too is that even with the stuff that you can't get rid of, the stuff you still carry with you, you learn how to better manage it. You learn how to better be more economical with your energy and dealing with the stuff that you're still forced to deal with on a day-to-day basis. And so it doesn't get to you as much as it used to.
Right. You create a bigger space for it. One of the things that I've created for myself that I find has worked for me is just having like a morning routine. Because I know that when I'm up early, I work out, I go through, like reading, devotions, affirmations, gratitude, that I'm in a better place to tackle what's going on. One thing that I learned about that I use that has helped me a lot. Like when you watch like a TV cliffhanger and it just kind of leaves you like, what is going on, right? And your brain is trying to process through all the scenarios. The second part of it is, how many times have you done something that was an accident and you go, why am I so clumsy? Why can't I get this together? You're asking like these negative questions, right? Well, what happens is there's this thing called affirmations. So instead of the I in affirmations, it's an O. And it's asking why questions. Why am I able to, look at my past so clearly and work through the emotions? You're giving your mind space to address what's there, but then to come back with an answer. So it's like when you're in the shower and like, boom, that idea comes out of nowhere, right?
Yep.
This is intentional, kind of almost like a softball pitch. You're setting yourself up to have your mind go and subconsciously process through and go, why is it that I'm able to do this? Why is it that I'm able to do that? Why is it that I'm able to have patience with my children? Why is it that I'm able to forgive myself? And you want to be careful in one thing, is that you don't put it as like a negative thing. Why is it that I'm not angered? Your brain isn't going to process that. Putting the negative statement of like no or not in front of something, it's not processing that in the same way that you would think.
Right.
So
go ahead.
So make it a why question with a positive result, and let your brain go to work while you're working on other stuff.
Yeah. Your mention of, those ideas and those things popping to you in the shower. I've often wondered, because I get them all the time too, why no one has yet created a shower journal. Where you can write them down in the shower, not have to worry about the pages and the ink writing.
They sell that. They sell waterproof paper or notepads over at the surplus store. You just get one of those and pencil, and there you go. You can write in the shower in the water.
JR, I'm sensing that this is something that you should put together and sell on Amazon. The shower journal. Figure out where Jason's got this paper at, and just create a journal so that we're not having to write in soap on the water, the watermarks of the shower.
Yeah, it's a good idea. So, Mike, we got just a few minutes left. Where can people find out more about you and get some help from you?
Sure. So I have these kind of conversations just like we're having as three guys here, right? I have a podcast as well. So if you like hearing other stories of guys that have traversed journeys, maybe as similar style to you, that we're sharing tips and tricks and how they made it, where they're at today, you can join me over at Living Fearless Today podcast. And the easiest way to get there is livingfearlesstodaypodcast.com. You can also find me as Hi Coach Mike. So HICOACHMIKE on Instagram and Facebook. And reach out in the DMs, send me a message. You can reach me at hicoachmike.com and set up a call if you're like, hey, this is where I'm at. How do I move forward? I love having conversations to, like we've talked about, our heart is for healing people. And
you know what? I just put that in the comments. Oh, wow. I meant to put it a banner across the screen, but hey, either way, the info is still there.
So it actually has podcast at the end of that, and that'll get to the podcast part of it. Sorry.
Yeah.
It's okay, JR.
I'm an autistic moment.
Dude, I feel you, man. It's like, how many times have I put stuff in there? But so if you add podcast to that, so livingfearlesstodaypodcast.com, or just look on whatever platform that you're listening to podcasts on. Look up Living Fearless Today. You'll see a big red background and my bald head, and you're in the right spot.
The picture you sent me.
What's that?
The picture you sent me.
Yes, exactly. So that is what you'll see, and realize you're not alone in what you're going through, and so listen to other people that have made that journey. Take hope and inspiration from it, and step into the ring. Ask for help. Find a community. You're not alone, and You can do this.
Right. Well, Mike, I think we could do this for another hour, but we'll save that for another day, because we
Yeah.
definitely want to have you back and talk some more and get some more information, and and just try to help other people.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Because that's
And I
what it's all about.
Thank you guys for holding this space and helping
no.
other people out.
No problem at all.
Yeah.
I mean, we try to look at everything: schizophrenia, dyslexia, childhood trauma, whatever it is. I mean, it's different, but at the root, it's kind of all the same.
Correct. Very much so.
Jason, anything you want to say before we get out of here?
Thank you so much for coming on and sharing some of your wisdom with us. That was great. And be sure to tune in next week as we get together. And I believe our topic is, are we talking about suicide next week, JR?
Let me look. Play the Jeopardy music while I'm doing this.
Oh, yeah. Well,
do.
at least he's organized.
Hey, there you go.
Yeah. But anyways,
Suicide prevention and mental health. Jason, you were right.
yeah, so we're going to be talking about these very important subjects, especially with this month being Suicide Awareness Month. So if you're in crisis, be sure to reach out to somebody, anybody, but be wise.
Us, if you have to.
Yeah, but be wise about who you also share with too, because you don't want to make problems worse for yourself. So,
yeah.
But yeah.
All right. Well, Mike, again, it was a pleasure having you on. We're going to do this again down the road a little bit, and please listen to his podcast, which I misspelled, and
it's all good, JR.
Just watch the replay and write it down when he says it again.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, my friends. Here, can I make a comment from where I'm at?
Okay.
I don't see that I can make comments from here, JR. I'm going to type it in the bottom of the private.
Okay.
And again, it's just adding podcast at the end of Living Fearless today.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's always
great.
easier when you're not on camera to do stuff. I mean, it just.
Oh, yeah.
Put right out, or maybe it makes you realize how much time you really do waste in between tasks. When you have it videotaped.
Yeah. Well, thank you, gentlemen. Thank you, my friends.
Hang on a minute. You typed it, and I'm going to put it in. I'm going to put it up.
Okay.
Yeah, just go cut and paste.
Yes, it is.
Perfect.
There we go.
Thank you, JR.
No problem at all. So we will be back next week, like we said, talking about suicide prevention and awareness. And Mike, thank you for coming on. And please, if you have a moment, listen to Mike's podcast, because I think it will give you some life-changing ideas and some tips.
I appreciate it. Thank you, my friends.
Jason, thank you. I'll see you next week too.
Yep. See you.
And we're out of here.
All right.
Bye.
Bye.